My name is Victor Tiffany, and I'm still with Revolt Against Plutocracy. This video presentation is an argument that describes why one candidate has an understanding of the scale of mobilization necessary to take on climate preservation. Let me share my screen with you so I can show you exactly what I'm talking about. I'll do some editing so you can better see these videos and screens I'm about ready to show. Because polling indicates Bernie Sanders is the only candidate who can defeat Trump, see the first video above. The senator, therefore, is the one candidate who's uniquely positioned by his supporters to take on the unprecedented and humongous task of warding off accelerating climate change at this stage in the process. First, for those of you who are climate change skeptics, I'm embedding a video below this video that shows what the options are. It's 9.5 minutes long, and it covers the worst case scenarios of doing everything possible to preserve the climate that's changing exclusively on its own without any human input whatsoever, versus not doing anything about a climate that's changing because of human activities. It is an understatement to claim that the entire world needs a green energy revolution if the human race is to thrive into the next millennium, 920 years from now. Because global warming is accelerating, it makes the problem more difficult to solve. A sufficient response, a green energy revolution, a new energy sector of the entire world economy must begin immediately after the ecocidal Donald Trump is removed from office. We have no choice with this matter. Many citizens listening to this presentation will equate federal government spending with higher taxes. But this is a misunderstanding of how modern money is created. I'm going to embed this video below the climate change video, which explains modern monetary theory in two different ways. It has two different people. If you understand it the first time, you don't need to listen to it the second half of this video. And if you don't understand either of those, I'm providing a link below this video of a presentation, a lecture given by the Galileo of modern monetary theory. It's been proven. That's why I refer to modern money, not a theory. It's been proven. The topic of how government pays for these services and goods and so forth, political economics is just too involved to get into in this video. So I'm going to encourage you to watch this instead. That way you won't be bored and so forth. Most viewers of this presentation may be Democrats who understand that every candidate with a D after their name is at least a little better than Trump, if not a whole lot better than him on the subject of climate preservation. However, we know many independent voters prefer the president over any Democrat. Whether those independent voters understand it or not, they are placing oil-powered economy over human survival. That is precisely what's at stake. If you doubt it, watch this video. The fact is, addressing climate change is an opportunity not just for economic growth, but sustainable growth in the energy sector that will continue for decades, if not centuries. And it will develop cheap, abundant energy if the transition from fossil fuels is done correctly. That is, using best practices, minimizing and going after fraud, and if it's done urgently. The climate is near a tipping point. The human race is at a tipping point with between climate preservation and runaway global warming. The hour is late. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report of 2018 declared that the world has 12 years to cut carbon emissions in half. That was last year, now 2 years ago. Since then, they have continued to increase. The world simply cannot continue burning fossil fuels and not see, for starters, coastal cities all across the globe go underwater by the end of this decade. Trump must be removed from office and replaced by a candidate who's willing to take on the captains of large energy corporations and agribusiness. This article, and I'm going to provide links to all these articles so you can read them for yourselves and understand if I'm just making things up, or you can read it and evaluate this information for yourself. This article has an interesting conclusion. You come down here to the bottom, and it says, the bottom line is that saving the planet from environmental destruction is not only achievable, but by focusing on regenerative agriculture and tapping up the central bank for funding, climate crisis can be addressed without raising taxes and while restoring our collective health with better food, better agribusiness, and so forth. So let's examine the policies from the candidates. This is Elizabeth Warren. She's got a series of proposals. She's taking up the task dropped by, not dropped, but when Governor Jay Inslee dropped out, she picked up the banner of climate leadership. Right? So you can see here her various policies, including, if we come down here, she raised the amount of money she's planning on the federal government spending up to $3 trillion, matching Inslee's commitment. Her plan would include $1.5 trillion for American clean energy, $400 billion funding green research. She has a plan for environmental justice, $1 trillion for vulnerable communities most impacted by climate change, right? The cities along the coast. And $1 trillion may not be enough, but at least it's a start. She has an agriculture plan. Again, remember what I just said about the damage being done by agribusiness. And it calls for voluntary conservation stewardship program, which compensates farmers for implementing sustainable practices. So she gets a good deal of this. She probably gets a B+. Her Blue New Deal is a plan for the oceans. So she has a fairly comprehensive approach to taking on climate preservation. Mayor Buttigieg has a plan, a series of proposals. He's called for quadrupling federal research and development. They don't total his investments here, federal investment, but if you look at all these totals, it comes out to about $1.5 trillion, considerably less than Senator Warren's $3 trillion. And he, like Warren, signed the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge. Next candidate we're going to look at is Andrew Yang. Although he's polling in single digits, he has great policies for proposals. First of all, starting with $4.9 trillion. That's considerably more than Warren. They list her here at $2 trillion. She's raised that to $3 trillion, but much less than what Bernie Sanders is going to propose. What's important is his overall comprehensive. He wants net zero emissions by 2025. That's very ambitious. That's for new buildings. He'd raise money for his program and create incentive for consumers and investors to choose clean energy through carbon fee and dividend system. He's got a lot of very good ideas here. He has a more comprehensive approach than anyone else. He understands, like no one else does, the three-prong approach advocated by this climatologist Paul Beckwith. I had a conversation and interview with him. I will embed this video below so you can watch this and get a better understanding of the three-prong approach, which is stopping carbon emissions by converting to clean energy, carbon capture, and geoengineering. So back to Andrew Yang, he's got a plan for all three of these. He's got also, he's the only Democrat advocating for the advancement of some form of nuclear power. So he's not talking about nuclear fission, which is the current state of technology, but thorium-based molten salt reactors and nuclear fusion reactors. I've seen some videos on nuclear fusion research, and it looks like an explosion waiting to happen. But it's certainly, nuclear energy will be the long-term solution for this if they can find a safe way to do it. He's going to stop leases for oil and gas on public lands. And this last section here, he's going to talk about, or he's going to propose research on space mirrors and stratosphere scattering of sulfur dioxide. This is covered again by Paul Beckwith. Talks about a volcano that cooled the earth back in, I believe it was 1993. He's going to propose $800 million into research. You can do computer simulations to figure out the safest way to cool the planet, because we currently have positive feedback loops in place. That's why we need this geoengineering to reduce the temperature of the entire planet. Let me give you an example of a couple of positive feedback loops. Because of the carbon that's in the atmosphere and methane that's in the atmosphere, the Arctic ice is starting to melt. Now that means in the summer there's Arctic Ocean showing where there used to be snow and ice. Snow and ice reflected the sun. The ocean absorbs the sun, absorbs the heat, warms the ocean, causing greater ice melt, causing greater absorption, causing greater ice melt, causing greater absorption. You get the idea. And it's happening at a rapid, increasingly fast pace. It's accelerating these positive feedback loops. I'll give you another one. Global warming leads to drier conditions in the forest, leading to more intense and more forest fires, which puts a lot of heat and carbon into the atmosphere, which leads to more warming, which leads to more drier condition, which leads to more fires, which leads to more warming. Two positive feedback loops. These are in place today, and there's others. Unless we cool the planet, we're not going to get a handle. We're not going to change. We're not going to capture enough carbon soon enough and convert the energy systems soon enough in order to stop these positive feedback loops before it's too late. Again, the situation is urgent. We're in a crisis. This is Bernie Sanders' policies. He understands what's needed in terms of the scale. So we start up here with, of course, he's proposing the Green New Deal. He's proposing $16 trillion spending in 10-year mobilization. He understands the scale of mobilization necessary to make sure we get this done on time. Unfortunately, he lacks carbon capture, and he has no plan for researching geoengineering. So I mentioned Andrew Yang, who's not in government, because what we need is Andrew Yang working with Bernie Sanders on his administration, maybe as Secretary of Treasury, or I'm sorry, Secretary of Energy, to make these transitions and to get a more comprehensive approach using this vast quantity of money. Before I move on to the next candidate, Sanders was the first to sign the No Fossil Fuel Funding Pledge advocated by climate change activists in June of last year. Now we have Joe Biden. Here's his approach to climate preservation, if that's what this is called. He's starting out with $1.7 trillion in spending over 10 years, and it's more than the 3.3 indicated here. I'm just going to flip to his website. It's actually 1.7 federal investment and leveraging additional private sector, state and local investments to more than $5 trillion. Now, if you watch that video on modern money, you'll understand that local and state governments cannot spend whatever they want. They actually have to raise taxes to pay for their spending. So what Biden's advocating here is higher taxes that you and I will pay to local and state governments if he gets his way. And he's also neoliberal, including the private sector here. Well, there will be market opportunities extracting carbon and reusing it for, I don't know, carbon bags to replace plastic cups, to replace plastic plates, to replace plastic rope. There's a lot of ways carbon can be extracted from the atmosphere and reused, converted into something that will work in the marketplace. So it's not impossible to have corporations investing money in carbon capture and reuse, but it's not the way to go. It's the neoliberal way to go. They will do it on their own. They don't need to be leveraged into doing it. This is the neoliberal approach. You can see the rest of Biden's proposals here. So he also signed the no fossil fuel funding pledge. However, his co-chair is a big oil and gas booster. This is a crisis situation that we have on our hands, and Biden's really got one of the weakest approaches. He signed this pledge, and yet look who his co-chair is. It's very scary to think that Biden might actually replace Donald Trump, and he's not going to do enough to save the planet, to preserve the climate into something that will survive. A green energy revolution is desperately needed and extremely urgent. It's not going to come from the Green Party. In terms of electability, Bernie is literally the only hope. He's not perfect, but he's known to be kind to others, and he appears to really care about people. He's leading a political revolution which will either succeed or the human race will come crashing down. First, coastal cities going underwater, and eventually, in 200 to 800 years, everyone may well die before the oceans approach the boiling point. We are running out of time. The human race needs mass mobilization and intergovernmental cooperation around climate preservation. Whether people want to do this or not is moot. Humans usually do what's needed in order to survive. We need to elect Bernie Sanders if we're going to survive, because only he understands the mobilization, even if his plans aren't comprehensive enough. He's smart enough to bring on Andrew Yang and include research into geoengineering and certainly investments in carbon capture, which, by the way, as Paul Beckwith points out, might be nothing more than these huge floats out in the ocean growing seaweed, right? Green seaweed will absorb carbon and convert it into oxygen. We need to plant more trees. There's ways to do this. And changing agriculture is another important step. I challenge you to find a polling analyst who disagrees with our conclusion in the first video above, as you see on this page. After examining the polling, which conveys how Senator Sanders' substantial, party disloyal, high leverage supporters described in this video will sabotage any other Democratic candidate running against Trump. They will either going to vote for Trump, they're going to vote third party, or they're going to not vote at all. All of them add up to leverage, which will sabotage any other candidate. If you can't find a polling analyst who disagrees with our conclusion, then it's clear and unambiguous. Only Sanders can defeat Donald Trump, which means this year's election comes down to Bern or Bern, which is a policy version of Bernie or Trump. Thank you for listening.